One of the most challenging things to stay away from in life is speaking Lashon Hara. It's really, really difficult to control your tongue and keep your mouth shut when it should be shut. And it's really interesting. Why is it so difficult? Like, what's the big deal? Why is it so juicy and fun and exciting and delicious to speak bad about somebody else? And of course, we don't talk bad about somebody else. We're trying to say good things about them. It's just that deep inside, when you're talking about someone else, there's like, something, right? Some little tiny force inside of us that's just enjoying the conversation.
Jealousy and insecurity.
There's like some kind of jealousy and insecurity, exactly. And we could learn a lot about Hilchot Lashon Hara, about how to keep the laws of Lashon Hara, of speaking bad, maliciously about others. But if we don't get to the root cause behind it and understand what is the force that leads to it in the first place, we can't ever rid ourselves of this horrible thing inside of us, because it doesn't do much good with us. It doesn't do anything good for us. Letting go and feeling good and talking good about others does good for you. Like, why should you talk good about other people? Because you want to be healthy, that's why. And when you speak negatively, you just feel a negativity inside you. And the more connected you are, the more subtle little differences make a difference to you. So yes, sometimes Lashon Hara could be very subtle. But our quest is, how do we get out of it? So there's the idea, and then there's the work. And let's see how much we can get through today. There is a Medrash which says as follows. It says, Medrash Tanchuma. And it says, talks about this malady that afflicted the Jewish people at a designated time in history. We don't have it today. We would be lucky if we would have this illness, because you have to be on a level to earn the right to be struck with this illness. The illness is called tzoras. We translate it as leprosy. It isn't. It's tzoras. What's tzoras? It's some kind of affliction that you get and your skin turns colors and things change. That is the power of tzorat. And so the Medrash says as follows. It says, on the verse Zot Teye Tovat Ha'Metzora, what it says is that there were four hediotes, four regular folk who were struck with tzoras. So it's a Mishnah in Sanhedrin, and the Gemara, the Medrash borrows from that Medrash to talk about tzoras. Here's what it says. The four people who spoke bad, who were they? Bil'am, Doeg, Achitofel, and Gehazi. And it's interesting because the Medrash is explaining and expounding tzoras, and yet not all of them, as far as I know, were struck with tzoras, except for the fourth one. But they all did speak bad. They all couldn't control their tongue. And in that sense, they were considered to be מצורע. So מצורע is someone who gets struck with this type of illness. This illness, it says, מצורע חשוב כמס. If you have tzoras, you might as well consider yourself to be dead. But there's many forms of death. So people die, and these guys all pushed themselves out of being involved and being able to be part of this world. And the fourth one actually got the tzoras. What happened to each one of them? Each one of them faltered with their tongue. Bil'am. Bilam's easy. Bilam was a man of God. He was on the same level and a par with Moshe Rabbeinu. And what does Bilam do? He exercises the force of his tongue to go out and curse the Jewish people. So all he wanted to do was, he wanted to, min Aram yancheni Balak melech Moab, he brings me from Aram. What did he do for? He bring me to hurt the Jewish people. And he says, where did I end up? Yancheni, where did he push me to? Gehinnom. He ended up in Gehenna. That's where he goes to. So because he spoke bad, slandered the Jewish people, of course, how did Bilam do it? What was Bilam's approach? like, I always wondered, how do you expect to get rid of the Jewish people who are God's people? God is taking them out of Egypt. He's bringing them out, and he's tending to them, and he's taking them to the promised land, and you are trying to convince God to destroy them. How does he do that? What's he thinking? The answer is very, very, very simple. Bilam said, when you're a parent, sometimes you want to get rid of your kids. Sometimes you're like, I'm done with you guys. Bilam was honing in on those facts. He says, Hashem, you also wanted to get rid of them. Remember by the Egel Azav, when they sinned with the golden calf, you wanted to get rid of them. When they sinned with the Meraglim, with the spies, you wanted to get rid of them. A bunch of times you wanted to get rid of them. He says, let's focus on all the negative that they do. Bilam had an evil eye. He had a way of looking at things that everything he saw was negative. So the Jewish people have a lot of good stuff they do. They also have a lot of bad stuff they do. And the question is, which one do you focus on? Bilam looks and he says, what can we think negative about this person? Now, we contend with the force of Bilam in our lives today. There's a little fellow called Bilam who inhabits each of our hearts and minds. You ever noticed him? Everything could be awesome in life. And Bilam will say, what's bad? What should we look at that's negative? And he will hone in on that negative to the point that you will be 100% convinced that life is a disaster, your life. And you have to get rid of that Bilam. That's what he wants to do. He just wants to focus on the negative. So he's the first person who used his tongue for the negative. The second one was Doeg. Now, Doeg, remember him? He's the guy who slandered King David to Shaul. Effectively, the whole rift that took place between David and Shaul was because of Doeg. So the story began the primary story, it began much earlier actually, but the story began when David was running away from Shaul. Shaul wants to kill him. Now, nobody knows that he wants to kill him. He's one of Shaul's men, and he runs over to Nov. Nov was a city of Kohanim, and there was a Kohen there, the Kohen Gadol by the name of Achimelech ben Achituv. So David goes over to him, and he asked him to give me some bread, and give me a sword, give me different things that he needed. Outside was watching a man by the name of Doeg. Doeg was a holy man. He was Abir Haroim. He was the head of the Sanhedrin, of the Beis Din. And he looks, and he sees. Now, the reason why the Kohen gave it to David was because he didn't know that he was running away from Shaul. He had no idea. It wasn't treason in any way. But he went and told it over to Shaul in a Lashon Hara way. He spoke Lashon Hara, he spoke evil tongue. What happened? Noiv Ira Kohanim was killed. 85 Kohanim died because of Shaul. Shaul says, I'm going to kill them. Nobody wanted to kill them. Doeg actually exercised and did the actual killing. So they were all put to death. Why? Because of Lashon Hara. It actually began much earlier. Fascinating how when David is a little boy and he comes over to greet his brothers. His father wouldn't send him out to battle, so he comes over to greet his brothers who were soldiers of Shaul. And there's a fellow called Goliath, remember him? And Goliath, he's standing over there and he's cursing the Jewish people. So David listens and he says, what on earth is going on? Why is this head of a dog? That's how Goliath's called him. But he said, why is this guy cursing Hashem? And he said, well, they need someone to go fight him. He wants one man to go fight him and no one wants to go. Everyone's scared. David says, I once killed a lion. I'll go. So now, who introduced David to Shaul? The answer is a guy by the name of Doeg, one of the boys, it says. That was Doeg. He introduced David in the most beautiful way. He said everything about all the wonderful, wonderful qualities of David. He says he's wonderful, he's good, this, good, that, good, that, good, that, good, everything wonderful. And then he stecht by introducing David in a positive way. And he added one final line. He says, V'Hashem imoy. God is with him. Whatever he paskins, halacha follows him. God is always with him. And he knew that bothered Shaul. And the rift between David and Shaul was created at that magnificent moment when Shaul says, okay, let's bring him and let's fight. And that's when the jealousy began. Who started the jealousy and who ended the jealousy? It was all Doeg. Doeg used his mouth to speak Lashon Hara, even when he spoke good. It was all bad. The next one is Achitzophel. David HaMelech said, 2 people I hate. When David hates someone, that means it's really to be hated. In Tanya, he says, you're not allowed to hate anyone. When David hated someone, it was really bad. And he knew the heart of the other person. The other guy's name was Achitzophel. Achitzophel was an advisor of David. He was a very, very, very special man. Lots to be said about him. He helped Avshalom rebel against David. He advised them to have relations with David's 10 concubines, and thereby created the biggest rift between David and his son. And for that advice, David never forgave him. Both Avshalom and both Achitzophel and Doeg, David HaMelech says about them in chapter 55 in Tehillim. He says, "Lo yechz anshe domim umirma lo yechzu yameim." Men of blood and deceit should never halve their days. One died at 34, one died at 35. When Achitzophel realized, he told Avshalom, he says, "Go attack David now, right away." And Avshalom didn't listen to him. He listened to Hushai, another advisor, instead. And when he didn't, Avshalom was well aware what would happen, and so he went home and hanged himself. He was so sure 100% that Avshalom had lost the war for not heeding his advice that he committed suicide. So Avshalom is one of those people who, because of this evil tongue that he used, he gets ousted from the world and gets pushed away. You see, these guys all die young. Gehenna will die young. The 4th one is the one who actually got Tsaras. Who is he? His name was Gehazi. Now, Gehazi, we had him in the Haftarah last week. Gehazi was the trusted servant of Elisha. You don't get to be the servant of Elisha unless you have to be on a real holy level. Elisha the prophet. And the trouble was that Naaman came to Elisha. Naaman had Tsaras. Naaman was the general of Aram. And a young girl who was a maid of his advised him. She says, go to Elisha and he'll help you. So Elisha tells him, go dip yourself in the river, in the Jordan River. And he says, what? The Jordan River, that's what he wants me to do? It's nothing. And his people tell him, come on, just try it out. And he goes, and the Tsaras disappeared from him. And he was so thankful to Elisha that he went back to Elisha and he tells Elisha, he wants to give him money and power and he wants to give him everything. And Elisha tells him, I don't want anything of yours, it's fine. I don't need any prize. And Gehazi couldn't handle that. What? Why would you not take that? So Gehazi went and he pushed himself in and he saw the gold and silver and he says, I have to take it. And he went and he took it. And he uttered the words to Naaman. He ran after Naaman and he says, my master wants. He changed his mind. He actually wants this. And he gave him a whole bunch of stuff. And he came back and Elisha cursed him. And he says, the Tsaras of Naaman is now yours. And Gehazi and his children became Mitzrayim for speaking bad and looking in a bad eye and seeing the wealth and wanting the wealth. And so he got the Tsaras. Now, the Medrash says, Rav Pedat said, Brit kruta lakadosh baruch hu ba'olam. Hashem says, I have a covenant in this world. Kol ha-mesaper lashon hara yilkeh betzarat. If you speak lashon hara, what do you get? Tzarat. Why do I know? How do I know that? Because it says, Zot tiye Torat ha-Metzorah. What's a Metzorah? Metzorah is someone who has tzarat, but Metzorah is motzi shem ra. Metzorah, motzi ra, motzi shem ra. So when you speak bad, you get tzaras. As we see from these 4 people, tzaras, one of them actually got the tzaras. When you can't handle being a good person and talking good and seeing good and positivity, you get tzaras. And I was wondering about it. Why don't we have tzaras nowadays? Why don't we have tzaras? Because we don't speak lashon hara. What? When we speak lashon hara, you ever noticed? You sometimes like, oops, I think I just spoke lashon hara. Not always when you speak lashon hara do you even notice that you're talking lashon hara. It's very difficult actually. In conversation, it just happens, and then you're like, oops, that what I just said now, that was lashon hara. That's part of the issue. It's very, very, very difficult. I once mentioned a story where a guy here in Shul was talking about his dad, whom he had issues with. The guy was a grown man. He was in his 40s. And he still had that real issue with his father. So his father did something. Now he's a grown man. And he's finally able to... He had a relationship with his father, but he liked to shtech. Because whenever he poked at his father, I think it made him feel good. So he's sitting over here talking to a guy in shul after davening, and he's about to say a juicy lashon hara. And he says, my father did, and he started to speak. And I walked over to him and I said, I'm just saying, it sounds like you're about to speak a very juicy piece of lashon hara. And I'm just saying that if you were to stop and pause right now, and you were to not utter these words, do you know what would happen? You would be drawing Hashem into the world in an unprecedented way. Because when a person pushes against his negative feel and doesn't do it, it's bringing Hashem into the world. And he says, okay, I'm doing it. And then he's sitting over there and he says to me, this is so hard. And he's like, this is literally Mesiras Nefesh. I feel like I'm sacrificing my life. I said, yes, what it says in Tanya, that to not speak lashon hara when you're in the middle of a mesaper bignus shel chaver, right? Sipur noim. It's about a good story. And to not say it is so hard. That's why it's Hashem coming down to the world. It's like, I'm doing it. Most of the time, it's very hard not to do it. We don't get tzoras because you have to be on the level of someone who's a holy person, whose life is holiness. And then when you speak something bad, you'll notice that you spoke something bad. Unfortunately, ever since there's no Beis HaMikdash, we're so entrenched in this negative space that we don't know what it means to be in the negative space. But I think that we do have to some level. I think that a lot of our mental and emotional health is a different name for tzoras nowadays, the contemporary form of tzoras. And we want to learn, how do we escape this? How do we rise above getting tzoras? Even if we won't be able to do it perfectly until Mashiach comes, but at least a little something of how to do it. Because it's interesting that the Medrash says the word motzi shem ra. That's Metzora is actually motzi ra, drawing out bad. But the Medrash says Metzora motzi shem ra. What's that word shame in the middle of it? I'm talking lashon hara. I get it. Motzi shem ra. There's a few people of whom it says they were looking to build a shame, a name. And once you understand that, you get how to overcome the core, the root cause behind why we fall into lashon hara. So, it says about the men who made the Tower of Babel. Remember the Tower of Babylon? What were they thinking? He's trying to fight against Hashem. What on earth does that mean? If you build a big, giant tower, so now what? Now you get to fight against Hashem? Of course, nowadays we're very smart, right? We know that if you get to the moon, you didn't do anything, you just got to the moon. You didn't get to Hashem. Just because you built a big tower doesn't mean you're any closer to God. You're just further away from earth. That's not where God is. But what they said was, V'naseh lanu shem penafutz al pnei kol haaretz. They said, let us create for ourselves a name, lest we get dispersed over the entire earth. They wanted a name. That's what they were building when they built the Tower of Babel. Ditto for it says over there, Hanefilim ayu ba'aretz. There were people who fell into the world. In Parshas Bereishis it says, Anshe Hashem. Men of a name, looking for a name. It says the same thing by Korach. Some of these people in the Torah, who did real bad things. All my mitzvahs never made it into the Torah. Their bad things that they did, their transgressions are in the Torah. So obviously there's some kind of holy transgression that they did, something special about them. Korach, it says, the people were Anshe Shem. He had Korach sinned with 250 people, men of name. Somehow they were looking for a name. What does that mean? You know what a name is? A shame? Looking for a name means I'm looking for recognition. I'm looking to be. I'm looking that I should still exist and I should still be special. That's the shame that I want. And what we want to do, in order to find a relationship with God, We have to get rid of looking for a shame for ourselves and trying to find Hashem. Hashem himself. What does it mean to build a tower of Babel? It means I feel like my life is a waste of time. And I want my life to be valuable. I want something in my life is going to be special. So I'm going to build a tower. I'm trying to build something to make me a legacy. I want to last. I want to have something real. It's very, very, very difficult for us to accept that one day we're gone. Toast. Disappeared. You don't exist. You never existed in the first place. I want to know that I'm of value. And that's what Kairach and Nephilim and the Migdal Bavel, everyone's got something to look for. A something. Give me a name. You know the word shame is the same as the word sham. Sham means there. Shayahu, the prophet says, Kar'u sham par'o. Pare says all the time, sham. What does it mean, sham? Sham is the same as shame. What's sham? Over there. Over here is never good. If I get over there, I'll be fine. That's what it means when you're looking for a name. What's wrong with a now? I can't reconcile myself with a now. I need to be over there. When I get over there, I'll have a name. Then I'll be happy. Then I'll be good. And what we want to do is overcome the sham. Because that sham, shame, that's where motzi shem ra comes from. That's where the whole story of Lashon Hara comes from. And in order to understand this, and how we get out of tzaras, I want to share with you a very deep Kabbalistic insight. You ready for deep Kabbalah? There's a Kabbalistic work, it's called Eitz Chaim. It's authored by Harav Chaim Vital. Harav Chaim Vital, and I think he made it into the news the other day because the grave of Harav Chaim Vital is in Lebanon, I believe, and it was defiled somehow. Okay, so we're going to talk about Harav Chaim Vital, bring some power into the world. Harav Chaim Vital, everything he wrote was the Arizal. Arizal was his Rebbe. So when it says something in the Eitz Chaim, it's actually from his teacher, the Arizal. So Reb Chaim Vital says as follows. He says, what does a nega of tzaras, what does the affliction of tzaras come from? He says what happens is, you lose moichin de chochma. There are two types of intellect. There is moichin de chochma and moichin de bina. Chochma is called Abba, and Bina is called a mother. So there's Abba and Ima. When you lose, I'll explain in a moment, when you lose touch with moichin of Abba, with the core intellect of Chachma, that's when you get tzaras. So, in your intellect, you have two parts to intellect. Actually, three. What are the three parts of intellect called? Chabad. Chachma, Bina, Das. The way we learn is we have three parts to intellect. One is, you're learning, you don't understand something, and suddenly the penny drops. That's called Chachma. Now you want to reflect on that, integrate, think about it. That's called Bina. Lavin davar mitoch davar, trying to understand one thing from another. So I need to have a something to understand, so I can take the something and work on it to understand. Chachma, then Bina. And then there's Das, which is a combination of both together. Chachma is a father, and Bina is a mother. You see why? What does a father give to a baby? A good idea. A little something. What does the mother do? Everything else. Right? The father gives, you can't have a baby without a father. But what does a father gives? An idea. Mother spends 9 months with a baby, hanging out. You know, fathers get to know a baby. When a baby's like 3 years old at some point, I think like a father looks, hey, I have a kid there. And the mother's like, I've grown with this kid. When the baby's born, she's already been with the baby for 9 months. She knows him intimately, but a father doesn't. So Chachma and Bina are two types of intellect. And Iyov says, Yamutu velo bechokma. You will die, but not if you have Chachma. Now I want to go deep right now into Chachma and Bina by explaining them. Because if you want to get out of tzaras, it means you have to have not a Bina, an understanding of Hashem, but rather a Chachma of Hashem. And there's a big difference between the Bina and the Chachma. And let me explain it by way of analogy of something we once discussed, but I think it answers this over here. There was a man who found Hashem. I don't know if too many people found Hashem as much as he did, But he really and truly found God. But he found God in two stages, if you pay careful attention to them. And I believe that one is Bina and the other one's Chochmah. And he only found God, truthfully, when he was in that state. His name was Yosef. Yosef HaTzadik was considered, he's the one man of whom Torah says, one of the only people, who says that he was a successful man. And everybody today wants to be successful like Yosef. What's success, Be'ivrit? Atzlacha. If I were to ask you, just think about it. Why was Yosef the most successful man on planet Earth? What's the reason? It's quite simple. Why was he successful? Because certain things, a bunch of things that he did. New example, what did he do? He was a viceroy in Egypt. The guy made it to the top of the world. Pretty impressive. And what's most impressive was, he started on the bottom. Literally. He was over here, he fell to the bottom, and the guy succeeded and he became the viceroy of Egypt. What else about Yosef was very successful? Would you say he was successful because he managed to overcome Potiphar's wife? Tzaddik and successful, yeah. Would you say he was successful because his brothers were convinced that he was going to take revenge, and he says, nope, no revenge. He did so many things that were extraordinary in their power. Do you know that the Torah says about Yosef 2 times that he was successful? Both times it says about him that he was successful were the wackiest things that he did. In fact, had Yosef died in the dungeon, the Torah would still have said about him that he was matzliach, that he was successful. Because it does not say about him that he was successful when he got out of the dungeon. It says about him that he was successful when he was in the dungeon. And not the dreams, but...
When they let the other guy out.
No. It wasn't anything that he did that you would consider success. It would be when you would consider him to be quite a failure, actually.
He was always with Hashem.
Yeah, exactly. When does it say that? It's interesting when it says that. Precisely. Yosef is always with Hashem. You walk around, you saw the guy, he said, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem, 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 did Hashem, Hashem. Kol hazman, the whole time, Hashem, 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 Hashem. Now he's in pagan. Today, if you say Hashem, everyone knows who Hashem is, right? So you just, oh wow, you're so nice. You're a person who says thank you Hashem. It's beautiful. Yosef wasn't a thank you Hashem guy in a simple place. He said thank you Hashem when nobody knew who Hashem was. So his master's name was Potiphar. And Potiphar looks at him and he says, who? And he says, Hashem. He says, what? Which deity is that? Which idol is that? And he's like, no, Hashem. He's in charge of everyone. The deities are nothing. The pagans are nothing. And the Torah says, Potiphar became convinced that there's Hashem. I don't know if he served Hashem, but he got that this guy serves Hashem and he was very impressed. Because the Torah says it. What does it say? Vayar Adonav ki Hashem ito v'chol asher hu oseh Hashem matzliach biyado. He sees whatever Hashem does, the guy's successful. Amazing. Hashem gives him hatzlacha, an extraordinary mazel, something that's happening which from above is just making him, you could just see God on him. When you looked at Yosef, you saw God on him. Now let's understand what that means. He was a slave. A slave. What does it mean, a slave? Not today's slaves. A real slave. He had absolutely nothing of his own. He's a slave. And yesterday, he was a successful guy. If you ask me about Yosef, when he was in Yaakov's household, he was successful. If I would have had to say what Yosef is now, I would have said failure. Failure. I would have looked at his brothers and I would say, they're successful. Unfortunately, they're also the perpetrators of the crime. That's true. But some of them are successful. They have families. Look at them. Nice families, beautiful. They learn Torah. They're beautiful lives. They were successful. I would have said about them success, but not about Yosef. There's not one word of success issued about any of them, only about Yosef, who was a slave. How do you say successful about a slave? Because Hashem was with him and he became head, chief of the slaves of Potiphar's household. And I would say, thank you, but no thank you. To be the chief slave is considered to be a chief failure.
It's the Rosh Zanav.
Yep. It's not even a Zanav. You don't exist. You're a slave. Anyway, as a result of this success, so Potiphar's wife got to know Yosef. And what happened? He ended up falling even lower. Now he finds himself in an absolute dungeon. Now, you know what a dungeon means? A dungeon is a place where you have no hope. Nothing. Zero. Nothing at all. Now, Yosef comes inside. There's no way of getting out. There's absolutely no reprieve. There's no way to escape. This is the worst possible position any human being could ever be in. That's where Yosef is now. What does he do? He looks around and he's like, okay, dungeon, fine. But I'm a resourceful guy. So true, I can't escape the dungeon, but it's insane. He becomes the head of the dungeon. Is that successful to be the head of a dungeon? What would his mother say if she were around, Rachel? She would say, oh, my son, he has this job. He's the chief of the dungeon. He's in charge of everything that happens in the dungeon. You know, he's in the dungeon. He's the chief of the dungeon. What a beautiful position. My son, the lawyer. My son, the doctor. My son, the chief of the dungeon. It's a lot more successful if you could be chief of dungeon than if you could be chief of medicine at the hospital you work in, or the chief lawyer, or the chief engineer. You know why? Because it's so depressing. And it's such a low. And if you could find yourself strength of character to be chief of dungeon, oh, that is a successful person. How did he do it? What did he do? What? He was always with Hashem. Do you know that the fellow in the dungeon, the guy in charge of the dungeon, it says about him, Vayar, what does it say about Sar Beit HaSohar? Ein Sar Beit HaSohar ro'ed kol muma biyado, v'asher hu oseh Hashem matzliach. Whatever he does, Hashem makes successful. Unlike by Potiphar, where it says, Vayar Adonav ki Hashem ito, Potiphar saw him say Baruch Hashem. When he was in the dungeon, he never said Baruch Hashem. It does not say that the chief of the dungeon got to see that he was talking about Hashem. He was not talking about Hashem anymore. So he saw success, but he didn't see him talk about Hashem. Why not? Why was he talking about Hashem when he was by Potiphar? And Potiphar says, wow, this guy always says about Hashem. In the dungeon, he was not talking about Hashem. He just had simple success. The difference is very simple. In the dungeon, he wasn't saying, thank you, Hashem. He was being it. Things were so bad that he had nothing what to thank Hashem for. So instead of thanking Hashem, which is actually a distance from Hashem, because it means there's me and there's Hashem and I have to thank Hashem, he didn't thank Hashem. He and Hashem became one. So if you saw him, you didn't see someone talking about Hashem, you just saw Hashem. And the reason is this. Why is it that when Yosef was asked the question, I mean, the guy comes in and he says, no, seriously, the guy comes in and he says, he interprets a dream. You are in 3 days' time going to be in front of the king. What would you think? Yosef's got a question. I tell the guy that I need to get out. Could you remind me to Paro or not? A once in a lifetime opportunity. Should I say it or not? Come on. Seriously? Hands down, what's Hashem telling you? What is Hashem sending you a message? The message is, of course, grab the opportunity. What's ishtadlus? To do something, if not that. Yosef did it. What happened? 2 more years sentencing for asking the butler to help him. What on earth? Why? Here's why. Because Yosef was a man who took his cue of what it means to be with Hashem from inside. He found Hashem inside. And it was always contingent on what was going outside taught him what he was supposed to be doing inside, but never did he allow the outside world to affect him. So first he was a slave. What does he do as a slave? When he's a slave, he looks around. He's like, this is crazy. I'm a slave. A slave is someone who doesn't exist. Mashakana eved kana rabo. A slave is owned by his master. I'm Yosef. I'm I'm Yosef. I'm one of the greatest people ever lived in history. And what am I doing? I'm stuck being a slave to some Egyptian? That's crazy. But I can't get out, and Hashem put me here. So what does he do? He says, oh, what it means is Hashem wants me to be a slave to him. Most people don't get to be slaves of Hashem. Most people get to do things for Hashem. All of us, we are all Avdei Hashem. We're all servants of Hashem. But we don't feel like servants because we don't even have a clue what it means to be a servant. We think there's me, and I do things for God, and I need to feel good about myself. When you're a slave, you get to learn very quickly that you don't need to feel good. Nobody cares what you feel. Your feelings don't matter. And Yosef took that and threw that and attributed it to Hashem. So he lost his own sense of existence, just like a slave loses his sense of existence. He lost it and he gave it over to Hashem. And he thought that was bad. Then things went progressively, regressively worse. And now he became a prisoner. You know what the difference between a prisoner and a slave is? A slave has no existence of his own, except that he does. His existence is to serve his master. It's pretty bad. Nowhere near as bad as being a prisoner. A prisoner is someone who has absolutely no sense of self whatsoever. You don't need to do anything even for your master. I don't care. You don't exist. You're a non-entity. Rather be dead than be a prisoner. Putting a person in prison is worse than death. Even, by the way, in an American prison. It's the worst thing ever. Because there's nothing to me. I don't exist at all. But Yosef wasn't one to allow outside surroundings to influence him. So he says, if I don't exist, what does that mean? That I am totally one with Hashem. I don't need to be doing anything. It's only Hashem. No one besides Hashem. You know, this guy who got out now, and he is, if you listen to him talk, it's otherworldly. You know this guy, Elisha Rabbi? Elisha Rabbi was a hostage. They took away his wife and they murdered his daughters. His family is gone. Then they took him, and what else can you take away from a person besides his family? They took away his children. They took away his health. They took away food and drink. They took away light. And they took away air. Then they shackled him and abused him in a cell, in a small little tunnel with no air, where you can't get out. And as far as you know, there's no way ever to escape. You don't know anything about anything. That's where they put him in. This didn't happen in the 1500s. This happened in the 21st century. Now, where we are now. Now, this year. That's what they did to him. And he walks out, and he comes out, and what does he come out with? They couldn't take away one thing from him. They made him like Yosef, literally. That's the same thing. They put him in a dungeon. And in this dungeon, he comes out a man of emunah, and he tells you, I never believed in God before. I wasn't a man of God. But in that place, I discovered the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. I discovered the one God. They could take away from me everything. But he walks out, and you see this shining emunah. It's almost as if he is the epitome of what a Jew is. You want to know what a Jew is? Look at Elisha Rabbi. That's a Jew. That's the core of what it means to be a Jew. Nothing like it. What happened to Yosef was exactly that. He's a man who's capable of doing anything and everything. He's one of the greatest people who ever walked planet Earth. You withhold from him everything. And what's left? What's left is nothing. A shmata. But he says, I'm a shmata. Really, what does the Sha'ar B'tochen say? He says a person is like always in a pit. Always in that space. You know the Baal Tanya when he was in prison. It's the same idea. He was in prison. But there's two parts to the prison. The sentence. On the one hand, they put him in prison for 53 days. and it wasn't death row, and it was torture. They saw a man of God. One part was they saw a man of God. But when Hasidim described it afterwards, they said, you know what the worst part of the imprisonment was? Worst part, hands down, was that he couldn't teach. Can you imagine? He's a Rebbe. He's the Balatanya. He was teaching before he went into that place in Peterborough. He was teaching short little things, but a lot of teaching. When he got out, his teachings became, we're learning his teachings now. That's what this is. And then they put him in prison, and they say, okay, no teaching. Take a man whose whole being is to be a teacher, and withhold from him the one thing that's the greatest force in his life. And I think many of us have this space that happens to us often in life. And that is, sometimes you say to God, I don't understand. No kids, no shidduch, kids who are struggling, loneliness. So many moments in life where you turn to Hashem and you say, Hashem, I don't get it. Like, you don't make sense. For you, I'm ready to do, or as one guy told me, he used to be a big bald stock. He used to give, I attest to it. He was an insane giver of charity. Big tzedakah. And then, poof, God took everything away from him. And he says, when someone comes to my door, you don't understand. They come to my door. He says, it's not, no one, they're cruel. And they come to my door, because they always used to come to my door. And they come in, they knock on the door, and I look at the guy, I said, I don't open the door. Finally, I open the door, and I give the guy $1. He says, to give $1 is hard for me. I gave $1. You know what I get for that $1? It gets thrown back in my face. I get a curse. You don't care about me. And the guy starts crying to me. You know what's happening? This and this and this and this and this and whatever. And he still lives in a nice house, right? The house he still has. He says, so they don't get it. I was getting curse after curse after curse. He says, I'm broken. I'm shattered. Those are the moments when you fall into the Yosef pit. And in that pit, what does it say about Yosef? He wasn't successful because he was a big balstocker. He wasn't successful because he was married and had a lot of kids. He wasn't successful because he learned Torah and taught a lot and did all that. Nope. The reason why he was a successful man, and he got married, and he had a family, and he had kids, and he was able to influence the whole world, and he was able to get to a point that all of us are known, Noheg Katzon Yosef, we're all known as Yosef's people. Because in Tehillim it says we are all called Yosef. It was very simple. It was because when he was in that little dungeon, all by himself, he became the chief of the dungeon. He became an Ish Matzliach. What made him Matzliach was he wouldn't allow surroundings to define him. They didn't define him. They merely gave him a cue of what to work on. That's what happened. It taught, he looked at his surroundings, very in tune with his surroundings. He looks around and he says, okay, what am I? I'm a slave. That's pretty bad. Me, I would fall into a depression. I don't think I would be able to handle it. What does he do? Slave. Okay, so Hashem is always with me, right? So what does it mean to be a slave? It must be I'm a slave to Hashem. Avdei Hashem. So he's excited, I'm a servant to Hashem. What does it mean? Everything's Hashem. So he starts talking about Hashem all the time. To the point that his master's like, what's going on? What are you talking about? And he was on such a high that his master realized this guy can do anything, and he put him in charge of everything. And then, fell down. Now he goes into a dungeon. You would think now you get really depressed. I would get depressed at that point. Yes, admittedly. What does he do? He's like, okay, this is really bad now. Now, I'm in a dungeon. Okay, so what do you do in the dungeon? So what do they need me for? Nothing. I'm useless. I can't even teach. I can't do anything. I can't. I'm useless. So what does that mean? Well, I'm always useless. There's only me and Hashem. So he can't say Baruch Hashem anymore because there's no Baruch Hashem. He just becomes totally nullified to Hashem. I mentioned last week, we daven for this every day. I think it's one of the most important tefillas to daven for. Before you daven for what you need, before you daven, Hashem, I'm stuck. I need health, I need children, I need to be able to teach, whatever you're asking Hashem for. Before you daven for that, ask Hashem that I should be a happy person. What do we say? V'ten sachar tov l'chol habotchim b'shimcha be'emet. Give the reward to all those who trust in you. And God, help me. Help me to become one of those people. Help me to become a person who trusts in Hashem and who doesn't get fazed by my surroundings. That the surroundings teach me what I am. When I look at myself and I see I'm helpless, I am helpless. Instead of saying I'm helpless, oi, woe is to me, and get into negative thinking, the helplessness becomes exciting. What could be possibly exciting about being helpless? The answer is everyone's actually helpless. Some people get it and some people don't. You're not helpless. You're literally always in the hands of Hashem, in the warm embrace of Hashem. What a place to be in. He doesn't even say Baruch Hashem anymore. He is one with Hashem. Do you know why Yosef became viceroy? Do you know why he was able to solve the problem? Nothing. Hashem just, and he got out and whatever. Do you know why Yosef was able to forgive his brothers? Do you know why he was this man he was a godly man? The reason is because he worked on himself and he got to the point that when he was a slave and when he was in the dungeon, he was an ish matzliach. You don't become successful because of anything that happens to you on the outside. You become successful because of finding God on the inside. Yosef had only, his shame was Shem Hashem. In the Arizal's terminology, level 1 is called Bina, level 2 is called Chochmah. Yosef reached level 1, which is Bina, understanding God. That's when he was a slave. When he was a slave, he says, okay, I understand God, I see God all the time, yep, I see Hashem, everything. Oh, Hashem, amazing. That's a level to reach. But on that level, you can still fall into negative thinking. You can still fall down. And so Yosef wasn't ready to become Yosef, to become the viceroy of Egypt and the person who saved us throughout the generations, until he fell into the dungeon. And in the dungeon, he became the most successful person in the world. When you fall into that dungeon of life, we all fall into that space sometimes. It's the hardest thing in the world. It's about getting excited. I just think when you fall into that dungeon, when you find yourself in that space, talk to Hashem and say, Hashem, I'm asking you for one thing. Remendel Futerfas, that legendary mashpia, once said, he said in Yiddish, "As me verliert die Geld, hat men gar nicht verloren. If you lose money, you lost nothing." This is from a man who was sentenced to Siberia and didn't see his wife and kids for 17 years in hard labor in Siberia. If you lose your money, you lost nothing. As me verliert die Gesund, hat men halb verloren. If you lose your health, you lost half, okay. As me verliert die Mut, hat men alles verloren. If you lose your mood, you lost everything. The one thing you ask Hashem for is, Hashem, give me the mood. Give me this ability to trust in you and to become part of you and to feel you all the time. Level 1 is called Bina, when you understand Hashem. Level 2 is called Chochmah, the father and the mother. The mother is an understanding of God. But when you have that, on some level, you're still going to look for my name. I want a shame. I want to, what am I? What's with me? That's the מצורע, Motzi Shem Ra. You know why people talk Lashon Hara? You know why we talk negative? Because we don't trust in Hashem. And therefore we get a kick out of speaking negatively about someone else. So we push out words that are negative, because when I push out something bad about you, it makes me feel good. The reality. But if I can find a space whereby I actually get into a relationship with God, a real deep relationship with God, in the sense that I feel Hashem ever present in my life, in everything, then the Lashon Hara stops. It's not about learning the halachas of how to stop this, how to stop that. It's about getting to a core space of when you're about to speak something bad, ask yourself that question. And you'll see. Yamutu velo bechokhmah. If you have bina of Hashem, even if you're in the space of being a slave to Hashem, meaning you attribute everything to God, you can still talk Lashon Hara. When do you truly get out of Lashon Hara? When you're in a space. It happens when you embrace the darkest moments of the dungeon of your life. We all fall into the dungeon. You can't see it in people, but we feel that way sometimes. And when in that space, you embrace it and you dive into Hashem, you pray to God, God, I'm not Yosef, but I want to be a little bit like him, a little bit, give me a little bit of that sense of feeling your presence, like Yosef does. Or then you become or you get over the Moitzi Shemra. If you can't do it, what does it say? What do you do when you got Saras? It says, Vehuva el HaKohen. Take the guy to a Kohen. If you got Saras, go to a Kohen. What does it mean go to a Kohen? A Kohen is a man of God. So sometimes you need someone out there We don't have too many men of God, but a little bit. Go to someone and talk to them about Hashem. Reintroduce God into your life. Because when we do, when we find Hashem in our lives, we'll discover all the negativity falls away. It isn't the ra, the lashon hara, to work on. It's the moitzi shemra, this desire to find a name, this desire to be something. When I let go of that, when I become a Yosef, I let go of every name I could ever possibly have. The people of the Tower of Babel built this. They want to build a Tower of Babel. What does Yosef do? He builds nothing. I don't exist. I'm totally just in a dungeon. There's no sense of me. And that made him the most successful person in the world. Success is when you find Hashem, and you let Hashem do the rest. And all I'm asking for from Hashem is to be able to feel that special joy of being one.